They asked for Echo. Lauren Hayes is the nurse nobody sees at Iron Harbor Medical Center in Tampa, Florida. Dr. Preston Hale corrects her in front of the entire staff as if she can barely hold a syringe, and every shift becomes another quiet execution of her dignity. Nobody notices that her sleeves are always pulled down over her right forearm. Then, on a night when a tropical storm swallows the coast, 2 Black Hawk helicopters land in front of the emergency room. Men in uniforms with no insignia carry in an operator who is bleeding to death after a training accident in the Gulf. They do not ask for a doctor. They ask for a call sign. Echo. Nobody in the hospital knows who that is. But when the wounded man begins to die under the hands of the best physicians in the building, the nurse everyone humiliated crosses the room, and the hands that always trembled become steady as stone. The sleeve rises. The tattoo appears. And the team leader understands, in complete silence, that the woman this hospital laughed at is exactly who they came to find. If this story pulls you in, do 3 things for the people who wear silent badges. Tap the like button, so this story reaches someone who needs it. Subscribe to Silent Badges Stories so you never miss the moment the truth comes out, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from, because every message reminds us why these stories matter. The rain started long before the helicopters did. Lauren Hayes stood at the medication station of Iron Harbor Medical Center, with her sleeves pulled down to her wrists, the way they always were, and counted vials while the storm pressed itself against the windows of the emergency department. Tampa in late September had a particular kind of darkness, thick and warm and heavy with salt, and tonight that darkness had teeth. The weather service had upgraded the system twice in 6 hours. Half the evening staff had called in. The other half moved through the halls with the tight faces of people who knew the night was going to get worse before it got better. Lauren did not mind storms. Storms were honest. They told you exactly what they were going to do, and then they did it. People were the ones who smiled while they cut you. Nurse Hayes. The voice came from behind her, smooth and amused, and her shoulders curled inward before she could stop them. Dr. Preston Hale had a way of saying her name that made it sound like a diagnosis. He was 46 years old, silver at the temples, handsome in the deliberate way of a man who had never once doubted his own reflection, and he was holding a chart between 2 fingers as if it might stain his hands. "You charted the potassium for bed 11 at 1900, he said, loud enough for the entire station to hear. "The order was for 1830. Do you know what happens when we drift on electrolyte replacement, Nurse Hayes? Or should I draw you a picture?" The unit clerk looked down. 2 younger nurses at the counter found something fascinating inside their charting screens. Lauren kept her eyes on the vials in front of her and answered in the small voice she had practiced for 3 years, the voice that gave people nothing to push against. "The pharmacy released it late, Dr. Hale. I administered it 4 minutes after it came up. I noted the delay in the record. You noted the delay." He repeated the words slowly, tasting them, smiling at the audience he always knew was there. "Wonderful. When the patient in bed 11 codes because his heart is a chemistry experiment, we will all feel much better knowing you noted the delay." It was not true, and every clinician on the floor knew it was not true. 4 minutes on oral potassium meant nothing, and Preston Hale had built a career on knowing exactly which accusations sounded fatal to people who did not understand medicine, and exactly how to aim them at people who could not fight back. Lauren said nothing. Silence was a skill. Silence was a discipline. Very few people understood how much strength it took to stand still and take fire without returning it. Hale stepped closer, lowered his voice into the register he used when he wanted cruelty to feel like mentorship. "Some people are born to follow orders, Nurse Hayes. Try not to forget which kind you are." He walked away pleased with himself, white coat swinging, and the station slowly came back to life around her, the way water closes over a stone. Nobody met her eyes. Nobody ever did. In 3 years at Iron Harbor, Lauren Hayes had assembled a reputation the way other people assemble furniture, deliberately and piece by piece. Quiet, timid, competent enough to keep, forgettable enough to ignore. The nurse who never joined the Friday gatherings, never raised her voice in a code, never argued with a physician, never rolled her sleeves up even in the brutal soup of a Florida August. The sleeves were the one thing she could not afford to be careless about. Under the left sleeve, there was nothing but skin and a story nobody had asked for. Under the right sleeve, on the inside of her forearm, there was ink. Small, black, precise. A pair of wings folded around a single word, and beneath the word a line of numbers that would mean nothing to a civilian and everything to a very short list of men scattered across the world, some of them living, several of them not. Lauren finished the count, signed the sheet, and moved down the hall to check on the old man in bed 7, a retired longshoreman named Walter, who was riding out both pneumonia and the storm with the same gravelly patience. He was the only patient who ever really looked at her. "They talk to you like that all the time?" Walter asked. His voice sounded like gravel poured through a screen door. The question had no pity in it, only curiosity, which was why she allowed herself to answer honestly. "Most days. And you let them. Letting them is easier than the alternative." Lauren adjusted his oxygen line, checked the monitor, smoothed the blanket with hands that knew how to be gentle, precisely because they had spent years learning how not to be. Walter studied her the way old men study weather. "My crew boss on the docks used to say the quietest man on the pier was the one who had already been in the worst fight of his life and did not need another one." He coughed, long and rattling, and waved off her concern before it could form. "You hold your shoulders wrong, you know that? You hold them like you are trying to look small. Takes effort, looking small. Most people do not bother. Get some sleep, Walter. I am just saying. I unloaded ships for 40 years. I know the difference between weak and folded." Out in the hall, the intercom crackled, and the charge nurse, a tired and decent woman named Priya, called the department together near the ambulance bay doors. The storm had made landfall south of the city. Roads were flooding. The county had 2 rigs out of service already, and MacDill had gone dark for flight operations, which meant anything that happened on the water tonight was going to come to civilian doors. "Iron Harbor is the coastal trauma catch basin until this thing passes," Priya said. "If it happens in the Gulf tonight, it happens to us. I need trauma bays 1 and 2 stripped and reset. Dr. Hale has the floor as attending. Whatever comes through those doors, we take it." Hale stood beside her with his arms crossed, chin high, wearing the expression of a man posing for a portrait nobody was painting. "Whatever comes through those doors," he repeated, "comes to me first. Tonight this department runs on precision. That means everyone operates at their level and nobody operates above it." His gaze slid across the room and settled, with the lazy accuracy of long habit, on Lauren. Everyone. The meeting broke apart, and the department scattered to its tasks. And that was when Karen Whitmore appeared at the end of the hall, heels clicking on wet tile, holding a clipboard like a shield. Whitmore ran hospital administration the way a museum curator runs a gallery, with great attention to appearances and a deep suspicion of anything alive. The storm had brought her in from home, which meant the storm had made a personal enemy. "Priya, a word." Whitmore did not lower her voice, because she had never once considered that the things she said might embarrass anyone but the person she was saying them to. "Corporate risk has flagged our staffing ratios for tonight. If anything goes wrong on this shift, and I mean anything, the documentation had better be flawless. That includes her." The clipboard tilted toward Lauren without Whitmore ever quite looking at her. "The one Dr. Hale keeps writing up. If tonight goes badly, I want to know that every questionable person on this floor has a paper trail." "Lauren Hayes has never had a patient complaint in 3 years, Priya said flatly. "Dr. Hale disagrees, and Dr. Hale brings this hospital $4 million a year in surgical revenue." Whitmore was already walking away. "Priorities, Priya. This institution runs on reputation." Lauren restocked the trauma bays and let the words slide off the way she had trained them to. 3 years ago, in a different life with a different posture, she would have found it funny. She had once been screamed at through a radio by men whose disapproval could end careers and start funerals, and now her professional survival depended on the mood of a man who had never seen more blood than a Friday night car wreck and a woman with a clipboard. Somewhere in the world there were still people who said her old name with respect. She had made very sure they all believed there was no one left to say it to. The thought brought the weight back, the way it always did. 4 years since the mission that had officially never happened. 4 years since a casualty report with her callsign on it had been quietly filed and never corrected, because the correction was more dangerous than the lie. 4 years since she had walked out of a debriefing room in Virginia, signed 12 documents she was not allowed to keep copies of, and become a woman named Lauren Hayes, who had trained at a nursing school she had never visited in a state she had never lived in. The tattoo should have been removed. They had offered. She had sat in the little government clinic and looked at the laser and then rolled her sleeve back down and walked out, and she had never been able to explain why, except that there were 7 names in her head that no one else was left alive to remember, and the ink was where she kept them. Somewhere over the black water south of the city, though nobody in that room could have known it yet, a helicopter full of men was fighting the same storm and losing. Somewhere over that water, metal had already met metal in the dark, and the ocean had already taken its first bite, and hard men with no names on their uniforms were already doing arithmetic about fuel and blood and distance, and coming up with only one answer that kept their brother alive. The answer had a trauma bay, a flooded parking lot, and a nurse whose sleeves were always down. Lauren felt it before she heard it. That was the part she could never explain to anyone, the part 3 years of hiding had not managed to bury. A pressure in the air, a change in the storm rhythm, the low harmonic that lived underneath thunder but was not thunder at all. Her body answered before her mind gave it permission, weight shifting to the balls of her feet, breath dropping low into her stomach, eyes rising to the black windows. Rotor blades, heavy ones, 2 aircraft, flying low and fast in weather that had grounded everything else on the coast, which meant the people flying them had stopped caring about regulations, which meant someone in the back was dying. The windows of Iron Harbor Medical Center began to shake, and the night outside filled with a sound the hospital had never heard before. And Lauren Hayes stood very still in the middle of the hallway while the 2 halves of her life came screaming toward each other through the rain. The first Black Hawk came out of the storm like something the storm itself had given up trying to hold. It dropped into the visitor parking lot beyond the ambulance bay because the hospital helipad was built for light medical aircraft, and the pilot had clearly decided, in about 1 second of professional judgment, that he did not have time to care. Water sheeted off the rotor wash in silver walls. 2 rows of parked cars rocked on their suspensions, and a shopping cart went cartwheeling into the dark like a frightened animal. The second aircraft stayed up, orbiting, a black shape against black clouds, visible only when lightning turned the sky the color of an old bruise. Inside the emergency department, people did what civilians always do in the first moment of the extraordinary. They froze, and they moved toward the windows. "Is that military?" someone said. "Why are they landing here?" "They cannot land there. That is a parking lot." They already had. The side door of the aircraft slid open while the wheels were still settling, and men began to come out of it with a speed that had nothing frantic in it. And Lauren, standing behind the crowd at the glass with her heart executing a rhythm she had spent 3 years refusing to remember, read the whole story in 4 seconds, because reading such stories had once been her job. 6 men. Rain gear over fatigues with no insignia, no name tapes, no unit patches. 2 carrying a litter between them with the smooth, broken jog of men who knew exactly how much jostling a dying friend could afford. 1 at the front clearing the path, 1 at the rear covering the group out of habit so deep it had survived the absence of any threat, and 1, tall and gray-eyed with a beard going early silver, moving beside the litter with his hand resting on the wounded man's shoulder, bent low, talking to him, keeping him tethered to the world with nothing but his voice. The doors of the ambulance bay burst open and the storm came in with them, rain and wind and the smell of jet fuel and the sea. "Trauma 1!" Priya was shouting, waving them toward the bay. "Straight ahead! Trauma 1!" They moved past her like a river moving past a signpost. The gray-eyed man swept the department once, a single flat pass of his gaze that catalogued exits, personnel, and equipment in less time than most people needed to find a light switch. And then he said the thing nobody in Iron Harbor Medical Center was prepared for. "I need one answer before anything else. There is a story in our community about a nurse in this hospital. We are looking for someone. Callsign Echo. Where is Echo?" The words landed on the department and produced nothing but confusion. Priya blinked at him. "Sir, I do not know what that means. We have your patient. Let us work. What is his status?" For one moment, one single moment that nobody else in the room would ever know to remember, the gray-eyed man's jaw tightened around something enormous, and then the litter was moving into Trauma 1. And the moment was gone, because the man on the litter chose that moment to start dying faster. His name, one of the team said, was Colt. That was the only name they were going to get. 29 years old. Their aircraft had gone down hard on the water during a night training evolution, and a piece of the airframe had gone into the right side of his chest, and the storm had eaten every option they had. The nearest military trauma facility was dark for flight operations. Iron Harbor was the only lit runway in a drowning world. Dr. Preston Hale entered Trauma 1 the way he entered every room, as if applause had just died down. "Everyone step back and give me a picture," he announced, snapping gloves on. "I have the patient." What followed, Lauren watched from the corridor through the glass, standing in the shadow between two supply carts where she had learned to live. And what she saw made the old cold arithmetic wake up in the back of her skull whether she wanted it or not. The picture was bad. The man called Colt was gray around the lips and his chest rose wrong, the right side lagging, the muscles of his neck standing out like cables with every breath he fought for. The monitor painted the story in falling numbers. The trauma team was competent, they were genuinely competent, and they were also drowning. Because Storm Night staffing had left them thin, and because injuries like this one arrived at civilian coastal hospitals perhaps once in a career, and because Preston Hale gave orders the way an actor delivers lines, for the effect and not the result. "Chest tube tray," Hale said. "And someone get radiology moving. I want imaging before I commit to anything." The gray-eyed man, Dutch, his men called him, stood against the wall with his arms folded, and Lauren watched him hear that sentence. Watched him understand, as she understood, that the man on the table did not have an imaging trip left in his body. Watched the discipline it took for him to stay silent in another professional's house while that house caught fire. One of the younger operators did not have that discipline yet. "He does not have time for pictures," the young man said, voice cracking. "Doc, look at him. He is drowning in his own chest. Fix it now." "I do not take clinical direction from soldiers," Hale said without looking up. "Get them out of my trauma bay." Nobody moved to make that happen, because nobody in that room was capable of making that happen, and everyone knew it. At the edge of the bay, one of the operators pressed a hand to his ear, listening to a radio the hospital could not hear, and his face did something that made Dutch cross to him immediately. The two men spoke in the compressed shorthand of people who had long ago stopped needing full sentences. Lauren, from her shadow in the corridor, read the young man's lips and the leader's shoulders and assembled the rest herself. The second aircraft was orbiting with more than fuel concerns. The crash on the water had not produced one casualty. It had produced several, and the others were being worked on by an exhausted flight medic in the back of a shaking helicopter. And the only reason they were not already on the ground was that the ground did not yet look like it knew what it was doing. She understood then, completely, what the next hour was going to ask of this building. Iron Harbor was a good community hospital. It had one attending physician on the floor, a thin storm crew, and a trauma designation that mostly meant it was better than nothing. It was about to receive the kind of night that teaching hospitals wrote papers about afterward. The staff did not know it yet. The man with the clipboard values in his soul, currently trembling over an instrument tray, did not know it yet. Inside Trauma 1, things got worse in the way such things do, not gradually, but all at once. The monitor alarm changed pitch. The respiratory therapist said words that made the room flinch. Hale called for the imaging he still believed he had time for, and the trauma nurse at the head of the bed looked at him, actually looked at him, with the naked expression of a professional, realizing that the person in charge was not going to save this patient, and there was nobody standing behind him. Colt's hand rose off the litter, blind, searching, and the young operator grabbed it and held on and said his name. Said it again. Said it in a voice that had ceased to be a warrior's voice and become the voice of a 25-year-old watching his best friend leave. The trauma nurse at the head of the bed said pressure is dropping, in a voice that had stopped pretending to be calm. Hale asked for the tray again, louder, and his hands, Lauren saw it clearly through the glass. His elegant, confident hands had a tremor in them as he arranged instruments, because Preston Hale had built his kingdom in a hospital where the worst nights were car accidents and clean heart attacks, and the ocean had just delivered him a piece of a war. Dutch saw the tremor too. He turned his head slowly and looked out through the glass of Trauma 1, past the crowd of stunned staff, searching the department one more time for a ghost the Navy's frequencies had told him might be here, and his gray eyes passed across the shadow between the supply carts, and stopped. Lauren did not remember deciding. That was the truth she would have to live with afterward, in whatever life remained after this night. There was no decision, no weighing, no farewell to the small, safe, invisible existence she had spent 3 years building nail by nail. There was only a dying 29-year-old with wings on his shoulder and salt water in his boots, and a distance of 11 meters between him and the only person in the building who had done this exact work, in worse light, with fewer tools, under actual gunfire. Her body was already moving, and her hands, her famous trembling hands, had gone still as a winter lake. Afterward, the people who were in trauma one that night would disagree about many details, but every single one of them remembered the door. It did not bang open. It opened with a controlled economy that somehow silenced the room more completely than a gunshot would have, and the small, mousy nurse from the night shift came through it. And something was wrong with the picture, something every person present felt before they could name it. It took the unit clerk 3 days to put it into words. "She walked in at the wrong size," the clerk said. Like she had been wearing a smaller woman all this time and finally took her off. The shoulders that curled inward were square. The eyes that lived on the floor were up and level, and moving across the scene with a flat, professional sweep that missed nothing. Monitor, chest, neck veins, the lagging right side, the tray, the tremor in the attending physician's hands. The voice, when it came, was quiet, and it was the kind of quiet that entire rooms rearrange themselves around. Tension physiology. He needs a finger thoracostomy and a decompression right now, not imaging. Doctor, you have about 90 seconds to be the one who does it. Preston Hale's head came up with the incredulous fury of a man interrupted mid-legacy. Get her out of here. Hayes, you are done. You are finished. Security to trauma 1. 90 seconds, Lauren repeated, moving to the bedside, gloving as she walked. And the trauma team, in the mysterious way of teams everywhere, made room for her without a single conscious decision, because human beings under fire recognize command, the way iron recognizes a magnet. Then I do it, and you spend the rest of your career explaining why a nurse had to. You do not have the authority. You do not have the training. You are a floor nurse. It was Dutch who ended it. He crossed the room in 3 steps and put himself between Hale and the bed. Close, very close. And he said one sentence in a voice pitched for the whole room to hear. Let her work, doctor, or I will let you explain to the United States Navy why you did not. 90 seconds later, the man called Colt took a breath. A real one, deep and ragged and whole. The right side of his chest rising with the left for the first time since the Gulf had tried to keep him, and the monitor's falling numbers slowed, stopped, and turned. And the sound that went through trauma, one was not a cheer. It was an exhale. A dozen human beings all discovering at once that they had not been breathing either. Lauren worked through it without looking up. Her hands moved through the sequence with an economy that had no hesitation in it anywhere, and the 2 most experienced trauma nurses in the room found themselves anticipating her, handing her what she needed a half-second before she asked, falling into her rhythm the way musicians fall in behind a conductor. There was blood on her gloves and rain in her hair, and somewhere in the last 4 minutes, without ever making a sound about it, she had pushed her sleeves up to the elbow. The young operator saw it first, the one whose voice had cracked. He was standing at the foot of the bed holding his friend's boot as if that were a medical assignment, and his eyes fell on the inside of her right forearm, on the small, precise black wings folded around a single word, and Lauren heard his breathing change from 4 feet away. He did not say anything. He looked at Dutch. Dutch was already looking. He had been looking since the door opened, and now he stood with his arms unfolded, and his gray eyes fixed on the ink with the expression of a man watching a grave open, and someone he knew climb out of it. The rest of the team caught it off him one by one, the way current moves through wire, until 5 hard, quiet men who had walked out of a storm were all standing at parade stillness around a hospital bed, staring at a nurse's forearm. Vitals are holding, the trauma nurse at the monitor said into the silence, not understanding it. Pressure is coming back. He is holding. Colt's eyes had found their focus again. They wandered the ceiling, found the lights, found the faces, and then found the woman working above him. And confusion moved through them. And then something that was not confusion at all. His lips moved. No sound came out the first time. The second time it came out cracked and salt-burned and barely human. But every person in trauma, one heard it. No way, he whispered. You are dead. Not tonight, Lauren said quietly, eyes on her work. And neither are you. Stay with me, sailor. Preston Hale stood pressed against the wall of his own trauma bay, gloves still on, tray untouched, watching his kingdom change hands in real time. And being an intelligent man underneath everything else that he was, he began to understand the size of what he had spent 3 years stepping on. The room heard him say, to no one, in a voice gone strange, "She is a floor nurse. She is nobody. I checked her file myself." Dutch turned to him then. Later, Priya would say that this was the moment she would remember when she was old. Not the helicopters. Not the blood. This. The big gray-eyed man looking at Preston Hale with something that was almost pity. "Nobody moves like that in a hospital," Dutch said. "That is muscle memory from a place none of you have ever been." He looked back at Lauren, at the tattoo, at the steady hands putting his brother back together. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, had gone formal, had gone careful. The voice of a man addressing something he thought he had buried with honors years ago. "We came here following a rumor on a frequency, looking for a call sign the community stopped saying out loud 4 years ago." He paused. The storm threw rain against the windows. "It is good to see you, Echo." The word went through the room like a change in pressure. Lauren Hayes, if that was even her name, and every person present was now performing that exact thought, finished securing her work, checked the monitor one last time, and finally raised her eyes to Dutch. Whatever passed between them had years inside it, and weight, and at least one unmarked grave. "Radio your command," she said. "Tell them Echo is asking how many others were on that aircraft. Because if the answer is more than one, this hospital is about to have a very long night, and I am going to need everyone in this building to do exactly what I say." The words moved through the department faster than any code alarm ever had. Out at the nursing station, the unit clerk was already whispering into a phone. 2 techs stood in the corridor replaying the last 10 minutes to each other in fragments. The sleeves. "Did you see the sleeves?" She pushed him out of the way. She told Dr. Hale he had 90 seconds. Priya stood in the doorway of Trauma 1 with the expression of a woman rereading 3 years of memory and finding a different story printed underneath every page. The timid charting, the refusal to be noticed. The way Lauren Hayes had once, during a violent psychiatric hold gone wrong, ended up somehow behind the combative patient with his arm controlled before security arrived, and had apologized afterward. Apologized, saying she had slipped and grabbed him on the way down. Everyone had believed her, because it was easier than the alternative. It had always been easier than the alternative. Karen Whitmore arrived at the trauma bay doors with her clipboard and her heels, and the flushed authority of an administrator who had heard the words parking lot and helicopters and lawsuit in the same minute. "What is happening in my emergency department? Who authorized a military aircraft to land on hospital property? Someone is going to explain to me right now who these men are and why why a floor nurse is standing at that bedside doing procedures." Dutch did not even turn his head. One of his men simply moved, without hurry, and stood in the doorway in front of Whitmore, polite as a wall, and the clipboard stopped meaning anything at all. "You are going to want to make some coffee," the operator said, almost gently. "It is going to be a long night." Down the hall, in bed 7, the old longshoreman Walter had levered himself up against his pillows to watch the commotion through his open door, oxygen line hissing, stormlight flickering on his face. A passing tech heard him laughing quietly to himself, a dry gravel sound, and asked what was so funny. "Folded," Walter said, settling back, closing his eyes like a man whose theory had finally paid off. "Not weak, I told her. 40 years on the docks, I know the difference." Inside Trauma 1, Lauren stripped off her gloves and reached for a fresh pair, and did not roll her sleeves back down. Outside, above the drowned parking lot, the second Black Hawk was coming down. The second Black Hawk did not land so much as arrive, flaring hard over the flooded asphalt with its landing light carving a white tunnel through the rain, and by the time its wheels touched down, Lauren Hayes was already standing at the edge of the ambulance bay, with her arms crossed against the rotor wash, reading the aircraft the way other people read headlines. The side door opened on a picture she knew by heart. A flight medic braced in the doorway with one knee on the deck and one hand on his patient, face gray with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been doing chest compressions and arithmetic at the same time for 40 minutes. Behind him, shapes on litters. 3 of them. One moving too much, one moving the right amount, one not moving at all. 3 inbound, she called over her shoulder. And the emergency department of Iron Harbor Medical Center, which 60 seconds earlier had been a collection of stunned civilians standing in hallways, discovered that it was already moving to obey her before anyone had consciously decided to. "Priya, I want beds 2, 3, and 4 stripped. Pull the crash cart to the middle of the pod, not against the wall. We share it tonight. Where is my respiratory therapist? Marcus, you are on bed 3 when it lands. Dana, warm blankets and pressure bags. Every unit of O negative in the building comes to this floor now. Walk it up yourself if the tube system is slow." The staff of Iron Harbor knew, in the way that staff always know, every rumor that had ever been told about the quiet nurse from the night shift. In the next 4 minutes, they learned something none of the rumors had covered. Lauren Hayes knew all of them, not their faces, their names, their strengths, which tech froze under pressure and needed tasks in single sentences, which young nurse was better than her own confidence and needed exactly one steady look to unlock. 3 years of standing invisible in the corner of every code, eyes down, mouth shut, and the entire time she had been doing what she was built to do, watching, assessing, building the roster in her head for a night she had hoped would never come. The litters came through the rain at a run. The first carried the crew chief of the downed aircraft, a broad Samoan man named Iosefa, with a thigh wrapped in a soaked pressure dressing and a tourniquet above it that the flight medic had placed in the dark, in the water, upside down in a sinking airframe, and placed perfectly. Conscious, gray, furious at his own leg. The second carried the co-pilot, a woman with burned hands wrapped in cling film, and a voice she was using to apologize to everyone she passed, as if the storm had been her fault. The third litter carried an operator named Flint, and one look at Flint made the cold arithmetic in the back of Lauren's skull start doing sums she did not like. Belly wound, fragment strike, low right side, the kind of injury that whispered for an hour and then shouted. Skin the color of candle wax. The flight medic had 2 lines in him, and a bag of fluid squeezed flat, and the expression of a man handing over a debt he could not pay. "He was talking 20 minutes ago," the medic said. His name tape said Ortiz. His hands were shaking with fatigue, not fear, and Lauren registered the difference and filed the man as an asset. "Pressure keeps sliding. I have pushed everything I have. He needs a surgeon." "He will get one," Lauren said, and did not say the rest of the sentence, which was that the nearest trauma surgeon was either asleep in a flooded suburb or stranded behind a drowned interstate, because saying it would have cost the room something it needed. Bed 4. Josefa to 2. Keep that tourniquet. Note the time on his skin, not the chart. The chart can get lost. Co-pilot to 3. Ortiz, you have done your job. Now sit down before you fall down, drink something with sugar in it, and be ready to tell me every intervention in order when I ask. I can still work. I know you can. That is why I am saving you for when I need you. The department became a machine. It was not a smooth machine. It was a civilian community hospital being asked to do the work of a combat surgical company, and it rattled and sparked and missed its timing. But it ran, because at the center of it stood a small woman with her sleeves pushed to the elbow, who never raised her voice and never repeated an order, and never looked at any problem longer than the problem deserved. Dutch posted his men without being asked, 1 to each litter as lifter and runner, 1 on the doors moving gawkers out of the corridor, and the sight of armed, quiet giants obeying hand signals from the night shift, nurse rewired something permanent in the mind of every hospital employee who saw it. It was into this machine, at its most delicate hour, that Karen Whitmore chose to insert her clipboard. Stop. Everyone stop. Whitmore planted herself in the mouth of the trauma pod with Preston Hale half a step behind her, and she had found, somewhere in the last 20 minutes, a red binder with the words, Emergency Operations embossed on the cover, which she was holding the way a drowning person holds driftwood. This is an unauthorized mass casualty intake. This facility has protocols. There is a chain of command in this building, and it does not run through a staff nurse with a disciplinary file. Dr. Hale is the attending physician of record, and as of this moment, Nurse Hayes, you are relieved of duty and instructed to leave the clinical area. Security has been called. If you touch another patient, you are legally exposed, and this hospital will not stand behind you. The room stopped. Not because anyone intended to obey, Lauren understood that in a glance, but because civilians under authority freeze when authorities collide, and every second of that freeze belonged to the man on bed 4, whose blood pressure was quietly leaving the building. So Lauren did not argue. Arguing was a luxury for people with time. She looked at Whitmore for exactly as long as it took to speak, And what she said in the voice she had not used in 4 years, the one that came from somewhere beneath the storm. There are 4 American service members in this room who are alive right now and will not stay that way on protocol and imaging. You have 2 choices. You can write down everything I do and use it against me in the morning, and I will sign every page of it. Or you can stand in that doorway and cost this hospital a body. Those are the only 2 options this night is selling. You do not have the authority. I have the training, the experience, and the only steady hands on this floor. Lauren was already turning back to bed 4. Authority is what you are holding. It is a binder. Dr. Hale. Hale flinched as if his name were an incoming round. I need a physician's orders on record for everything we are about to do, and you are the attending. You can be the doctor who saved 4 sailors in a hurricane, or the doctor who watched. I know which one you have been for 3 years. Tonight you get to pick again. It was, several staff members would say afterward, the strangest mercy any of them had ever witnessed. She had every reason to bury him. Instead, the terrible little nurse had reached into the wreckage of Preston Hale's authority and handed him back a single unearned chance to matter, and the whole room watched him understand it, watched the war behind his face. Vanity fighting self-preservation, fighting the last unspoiled scrap of the person who had once gone to medical school for reasons he could no longer remember. Hale stepped past Whitmore. He did not look at her. "Bag another unit," he said hoarsely, gloving, "and someone get me the on-call surgeon on the phone. Whatever she asks for, order it." Whitmore stood alone in the doorway with her binder. Behind her, the security officer she had summoned finally arrived, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Delgado, with an anchor tattooed on his forearm, and 22 years of the United States Navy behind him. And he took in the scene, the litters, the operators, the small woman running the pod with her sleeve pushed up and black wings inked on her forearm, and he removed his radio from his belt and turned it off. "I will be at the door if anyone needs me," Delgado said, to no one in particular, and posted himself beside the entrance at something very close to parade rest. On bed 4, Flint's pressure slid again, and this time it did not slide back. "He is crashing," Ortiz said, on his feet, sugar drink abandoned, and at that exact moment, because catastrophe has never once in the history of the world agreed to arrive in single file, the ambulance bay doors banged open behind them and the county delivered its own contribution to the night. A city rig, running without half its lights, brought in a 50-year-old roofer named Gable, whose carport had come down on him during the worst of the wind, chest and shoulder crushed, his teenage son soaked to the bone and white as paper running alongside the gurney, because no power on earth was going to make him let go of the rail. Behind that rig, a second one, a pregnant woman from the evacuation shelter, whose labor had decided that a hurricane was exactly the correct time, and a paramedic with the eyes of a man who very much did not want to deliver a baby in a parking lot full of military helicopters. A community hospital with 1 attending, 4 military casualties, and a night crew running on adrenaline and instant coffee should have folded right there. Every disaster study ever written said so. What the studies had not accounted for was that the small nurse at the center of the floor had once run casualty collection points, where the wounded arrived faster than they could be counted, in languages she did not speak, under skies that were actively trying to kill everyone involved, and that to such a person, a crushed roofer, a baby in a hurry, and a bleeding sailor were not chaos at all. They were simply a queue that had not been sorted yet. "Dana, take the mother to the family birthing suite. Wake up whoever is on call for obstetrics, even if you have to call their home landline. She is not delivering in my trauma pod." "Marcus, chest films on the roofer the moment he is stable enough to hold still. Watch his breathing on the left. If it changes, you come get me at a run. And someone get that boy a dry blanket and a chair where he can see his father, because a scared child standing in a doorway helps no one and he has earned the front row." Lauren was moving between beds as she spoke, hands and eyes on Flint, voice on everything else. "Ortiz, you are back on the clock. Take bed 4's second line. Dr. Hale, I need you on the roofer. Chest wall injury, possible pulmonary contusion. That is squarely your training, and he needs an attending's eyes more than this bed does right now." And Preston Hale, to the wonder of every Iron Harbor employee present, said, "On it," and went, and was, for the next 40 minutes, by the unanimous later testimony of the staff who worked beside him, a genuinely excellent doctor, as if some jammed mechanism inside the man had been struck at precisely the correct angle and had begun, gracelessly, to turn again. The teenage boy sat where he was told, wrapped in a warmed blanket, and watched the whole impossible night revolve around a small woman with black wings inked on her forearm. Years later, in a personal statement attached to a medical school application, he would try to describe it and give up, and write simply that on the worst night of his life, he had watched somebody refuse to let a single person in a building full of strangers be alone, and that he had decided before sunrise what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. "He is crashing," Ortiz said again, louder at bed 4, and the machine that Lauren had built roared into its highest gear. And outside the windows, the storm threw everything it had left at the little hospital on the flooded coast, as if the night itself had decided to find out exactly who Echo used to be. There is a kind of fight that has no fists in it, and the staff of Iron Harbor Medical Center spent the darkest hour of the storm learning what it looks like. It looks like a nurse with gray-blue eyes, standing at the head of a bed calling numbers, in a voice that never changes pitch, so that the numbers themselves become a kind of heartbeat the whole room can synchronize to. It looks like blood going in one line while it leaves through somewhere no one can see. A race between a hospital and a hole. It looks like a combat flight medic and a civilian respiratory therapist working shoulder to shoulder, strangers an hour ago, moving now like a single organism, because the woman at the head of the bed had assigned them to each other on instinct, and the instinct had been correct. Flint died twice that hour. Both times the machine dragged him back. The second time, Lauren stood with 2 fingers on the pulse in his neck through the longest 90 seconds of the hospital's institutional life, and the young operator who had held Colt's boot, a 25-year-old Texan the team called Boone, stood across from her with tears cutting lanes through the salt crust on his face, doing compressions with the beautiful ruined desperation of a man keeping his brother's heart moving with his own arms. "Stay on rhythm, Boone," Lauren said quietly. "Do not speed up. He needs every stroke to count. You are doing it exactly right. You know my name." His voice came apart around the words. "How do you know my name?" "Because Dutch said it once at the door, 40 minutes ago, and names matter." A pulse flickered under her fingers, faded, flickered again, held. "There he is. Hold. Hold. Stop compressions." The monitor found its voice, stumbling, then steadying, and the room exhaled again, and Boone stood over his friend, with his hand still hovering in position, unable to trust the machine, until Lauren reached across the bed and pressed his hands down flat against the blanket. "He came back, Boone. Look at the monitor, not at me. He came back. The surgeon problem broke at 4 a.m. The on-call trauma surgeon was marooned north of the flooded interchange with her car dead in 3 feet of water, and the storm was refusing to open a corridor, and Flint's belly could not wait for dawn. What happened next happened on 2 phones at once. On the first phone, Priya begged the county for anything with wheels high enough to move a surgeon. On the second phone, Dutch spoke 30 words to someone whose name he did not say, and 11 minutes later the impossible occurred, and a high-water rescue vehicle belonging to a National Guard unit that had officially suspended operations came growling through the flood with a 58-year-old trauma surgeon named Okafor, sitting in the back, barefoot, in pajama pants and a rain jacket, holding her boots in her hands. Dr. Okafor walked into the trauma pod, took one look at the monitor, one look at the wound, and one look at the small nurse whose orders every person in the room was clearly moving on, and being the kind of physician who had spent 30 years learning what mattered and what did not. She asked exactly one question. "What do you need from me?" "A surgeon," Lauren said. "The rest is already done. He is as stable as this floor can make him. The damage is low right side. I believe the bleeding is slowing but not stopped. He has had 4 units, and he is holding pressure by his fingernails. He needs your table in the next 30 minutes. Then he will have it." Okafor was already moving, waving at the operating room corridor, pulling her boots on while she walked. At the doors she stopped and looked back. "Where did you train?" "Somewhere with worse lighting," Lauren said, and turned back to her patients, and Okafor looked at her for one long second, at the sleeves, at the ink, at the 5 silent men arranged around the pod like standing stones. And then she went to do her work and asked nothing further, because 30 years of trauma surgery teaches a person to recognize the shape of a story that is not hers to open. The wait for word from the operating room was its own kind of weather. The team gathered in the corridor outside the surgical wing, the way men of their trade always gather, not pacing, not talking, simply present, arranged along the wall, in a stillness that made two passing housekeepers walk softer without knowing why. Lauren used the hour the way she had been taught to use such hours, moving through her other patients, resetting the trauma pod for whatever the back half of the storm might send, and quietly walking Ortiz through his own timeline of the night, intervention by intervention, until the flight medic understood and believed that every choice he had made in the back of that shaking aircraft had been correct, and that the man on Okafor's table was alive because of the 40 minutes of impossible work that had come before the hospital, not in spite of them. It was the oldest debriefing trick in her old world, and it worked the way it always worked. Somewhere in the telling, the shake went out of the young man's hands. When Okafor came out at last, cap in her hand, she did not make the corridor wait. He is stable. The damage was survivable, and now it is repaired. Somebody bought that man exactly enough time, and I know precisely who, because I have never in 30 years received a handoff that clean from a civilian floor. Her eyes went down the line of silent giants along the wall. You can breathe now, gentlemen. All of you. That is a medical order. The eye of the storm reached the coast at 10 minutes past 5, and an unnatural stillness fell over the flooded world. And in that stillness, the department finally slowed enough for human beings to remember they were human beings. Boone fell asleep sitting upright on the floor of the corridor, with his back against the wall, and his hand wrapped around the rail of Colt's bed. The co-pilot with the burned hands finally stopped apologizing when the morphine took hold, and cried instead, quietly, and the young nurse Dana sat with her without being assigned to. Iosefa, the crew chief, waiting his turn for the operating room with his tourniquet converted and his leg splinted, ate 4 puddings, and told the unit clerk lies about how the helicopter had really gone down until she laughed despite herself. It was in that borrowed stillness that Colt woke properly for the first time, and asked the nurse checking his chest tube a question, and the nurse went and found Lauren, because the question was for her. He looked younger awake than he had looked dying, which was the way of it. 29 going on 19, propped at an angle, wired and tubed and gray around the edges, watching her cross the room with an expression she had seen before on exactly one other face, in photographs she had made herself stop keeping. They told me your cover name, Colt said. His voice was sandpaper and helium. I am not going to use it. You know who I am? I knew the moment I saw your jaw, sailor. You have his jaw. Lauren pulled the chair to the bedside and sat, which she had not done all night, in anyone's room. Daniel used to show me pictures of a skinny kid holding fish that were obviously too big for the story attached to them. The laugh cost him, tube and all, and he paid it gladly. He wrote about you, letters, real paper ones. Our mother made him. He was not supposed to say anything about anything, so it was all workarounds. The best medic God ever wasted on the Navy. He wrote that more than once. Colt's eyes shone and he let them. We were told there was nobody left to ask. My mother wrote letters to the Navy for a year, asking how it happened, asking if he was scared, asking if somebody was with him. The heart monitor tapped along under the silence. Was somebody with him? And Lauren Hayes, who had carried the answer to that question alone for 4 years, across 3 states and a false name, leaned forward and told a dying man's little brother the truth. Quietly, all of it that was hers to give. That it had been fast where it mattered, and slow where it did not. That his brother's hands had been steady the whole time, working, right up until they were not, because Daniel had been holding pressure on another man's wound when he was hit, and had refused twice to let go of it. That the last thing he said had not been about pain, that she had been 11 inches away, and that her face was the last thing he saw, and that she had said his name so he would not go into it alone. He was not scared, she said. He was busy. Your brother died the way most men only manage to live, Colt, facing his work. The boy wept then, carefully around his chest tube, and she stayed in the chair with her hand over his until it passed, and neither of them counted the minutes because some debts are not payable in minutes anyway. On her way back through the department, she passed bed 7, where Walter the longshoreman was awake against doctor's orders and grinning at her through his oxygen line like a man collecting on a bet. Folded, he said. I called it. 40 years on the docks. Go to sleep, Walter. Charge nurse someday, mark me. He closed his eyes, supremely satisfied with the universe. The quiet ones. It is always the quiet ones. And in the family waiting room, under the flat fluorescent light, Dutch found Lauren standing at the window with 2 cups of coffee, watching the dead calm eye of the hurricane sit over the drowned parking lot where his aircraft rested with its rotors tied down. He handed her a cup. For a long time, neither of them spent any words. 4 years, Dutch said finally. There was a report. There was a casket with a flag on it, Echo. I helped carry it. I know. It was heavy. Whatever they put in it was heavy. His voice stayed level, which was how she knew what it was costing him. 200 people stood in the rain at Arlington and watched your name go into the ground. Torres read the eulogy. He forgot the middle part and swore in front of your mother. I know, Dutch. I wrote 3 letters that year and burned all 3. Lauren watched the rain begin to whisper again at the far edge of the eye. The mission went wrong in a way that had names attached to it. Important names. The kind that do not go to prison. The kind that make problems disappear instead. I was the problem. I knew what I had seen, and I could prove none of it. And the man who signed my casualty report told me, in a very comfortable office, in a very calm voice, that Echo could die a hero on paper or a traitor in a hearing room, and that either way the 7 were staying dead, and nothing I said would change the arithmetic. So I took the hero option and I disappeared. It kept my mother safe. It kept your team safe. It kept the last promise I was in any position to keep. The names on her forearm sat between them in the fluorescent light. Dutch had known all 7 of the people those numbers stood for. One of them had taught him to shoot. One of them had been the older brother of a rookie named Colt, who had joined the teams 2 years after the funeral. Carrying a photograph of a sister in arms, his brother's letters had called the best medic God ever wasted on the Navy. Colt recognized you from a photograph, Dutch said. You know that, right? His brother kept one taped inside his locker. The kid memorized your face at 14 years old. Tonight he woke up bleeding in a civilian hospital in a hurricane, and the dead woman from his brother's locker put her hands inside his chest and ordered him to live. He shook his head slowly. There are chaplains who would build a whole career on tonight. How did you find me? Lauren asked. The frequency. You asked for Echo before I ever touched him. You came here already knowing. 9 months ago, a Navy corpsman came through Tampa for a trauma conference and rode along with a county ambulance crew for a night shift. They brought a bad car wreck into this emergency room, and he watched a night nurse do a needle decompression that he swore on his mother was taught to her by our schoolhouse, the exact way, the exact sequence, and then watched the same nurse apologize to the doctor for overstepping and fold herself back into the corner. He told the story in a bar in Virginia Beach the way sailors tell ghost stories. It took 9 months to reach me. When our bird went into the water tonight, and the storm took every military option off the board, I looked at the map, and Iron Harbor was the closest lit trauma center. Dutch drank his coffee. I want to tell you I chose this hospital for Flint. The truth is I chose it for the ghost story. I would have made the same choice at half the odds. Down the hall, a door opened, and Whitmore's voice came through it, brittle and rehearsed, speaking to someone on a phone about liability exposure and unauthorized personnel, and Dutch's jaw set. They are going to come after you in the morning, he said. The binder woman and the peacock. People like that always wait for daylight. Yes. You could let me make a call. By noon there would be a public affairs officer and a Navy Cross citation and news vans on that flooded lawn, and no administrator in America would dare touch you. I know. Lauren finished her coffee and set the cup down. And through the window, the far wall of the hurricane's eye stood over the Gulf, like a mountain range deciding when to move. That is why I am asking you not to. I buried Echo for a reason, Dutch, and the reason has not changed. But there is one call I will let you make, and one uniform I want in this building by morning. And when they walk through that door, I need you to let me be the one who explains it to this hospital. Dutch looked at her for a moment, and then, for the first time since his aircraft had come screaming out of the storm, he smiled. He said. Whatever you are about to do to that man, I want a seat in the front. Morning came the way mornings come after hurricanes, indecent in its beauty. The sky scrubbed clean and blue over a drowned world, sunlight glittering on the flooded parking lot where 2 Blackhawks stood with their rotors tied like sleeping animals, and the day shift of Iron Harbor Medical Center waited and detoured and carpooled its way into a building that was no longer the building they had left. They heard it in pieces, in the locker room, at the time clock, in the stairwells. Helicopters. Navy SEALs. 4 saved. Surgery through the eye of the storm. And braided through every version. Impossible, undeniable, witnessed by 30 people. The quiet one, the mouse, the nurse Hale used for target practice. Sleeves up, running the entire floor, and the soldiers obeyed her. I am telling you, they obeyed her. The emergency meeting convened at 9 in the main conference room, called by Karen Whitmore, who had spent the hours since dawn assembling a case the way she assembled everything, in a binder, with tabs. Present were the chief medical officer, the director of nursing, 2 members of hospital council on speakerphone, Priya, Dr. Preston Hale, and, seated alone on one side of the long table with her sleeves still rolled to the elbow, Lauren Hayes, who had not slept and did not appear to require it. Whitmore began with the phrase, catastrophic breach of protocol, and built upward from there. Unauthorized aircraft, unauthorized intake, a staff nurse, performing physician-level interventions, armed unidentified personnel obstructing hospital security, liability exposure that made counsel on the speakerphone audibly shift in their chairs. She spoke for 11 minutes, and she was, in the narrow accounting of her binder, correct about nearly all of it. And when she finished, she squared her pages and delivered the sentence she had been carrying all night like a stone. Effective immediately. We are terminating Nurse Hayes and reporting her conduct to the State Board of Nursing. This institution runs on reputation, and last night, this woman gambled with ours. Into the silence that followed, Lauren said, "May I ask one question before the vote?" The chief medical officer, a careful gray man named Brooks who had spent the morning reading incident reports that read like war fiction, nodded. "Is the reputation of this hospital better served by the story in that binder?" Lauren said, unhurried. "Or by the 4 service members alive upstairs? Because you only get to tell one of them, and the United States Navy is about to help you choose." The knock on the conference room door came so precisely on cue that Priya would always half believe Lauren had somehow arranged the timing to the second. Delgado, the security officer, opened it, standing straighter than anyone at Iron Harbor had ever seen him stand. And through it came a Navy captain in service khaki, silver eagles on his collar, a man in his 50s with a weathered squint and a folder under his arm, trailed by Dutch, who posted himself against the back wall with the expression of a man who has been promised theater. "Good morning," the captain said. "Captain Reyes Halloran, United States Navy. I am looking for the administrator of this facility." His eyes found Whitmore's binder, then Whitmore. "That would be you. Outstanding. I am here on 2 errands. The first is to formally convey the gratitude of the Navy and of 4 families who will get their people back because of what this hospital did last night. There will be a letter. There may, if your public affairs office is wise, be a great deal more than a letter, because this is the kind of story the country is starving for, and it happened under your roof." Whitmore's posture performed a complicated maneuver, hostility and hunger colliding somewhere around her shoulders. "And the second errand, Captain?" "The second errand is personnel." Halloran laid his folder on the table and did not open it. "Somewhere in this building is a former naval officer whose service record I am not at liberty to discuss in any detail, in this room or any other. What I am at liberty to say is this. The Department of the Navy is aware of certain events 4 years ago. Certain findings have been quietly revisited. Certain men who signed certain documents are no longer in any position to sign anything." His eyes moved for the first time to the small woman with her sleeves rolled up, and something passed across his weathered face that in a younger man might have been called emotion. "And there is a piece of paper in this folder that has taken 3 good people 2 years to make exist, which corrects the record of an officer who was declared dead and restores to her, quietly, without ceremony, at her own long-standing request, her name, her rank of lieutenant commander, and her honor. She was never a floor nurse hiding from a mistake. She was a decorated special operations medical officer protecting other people from the truth, at the price of her entire life. The Navy did not deserve her silence. It intends to deserve her, from this morning forward, whatever she chooses to do." Nobody in the room moved. On the speakerphone, one of the lawyers could be heard very quietly closing a laptop. Preston Hale stood up. He had aged years in a night, and the room braced, expecting the counterattack, the reframing, the performance, because that was who Preston Hale had always been. Instead, he stood with his hands flat on the table, looking at them as if they belonged to someone else. and what came out of him came out stripped of all music. "I reviewed the record from last night," he said. "Every intervention she called was correct, everyone. Faster than I would have called them, than I would. Several I would not have had the courage to call at all." He made himself look at Lauren, and it clearly cost him more than anything the storm had asked of him. "I have spent 3 years telling this hospital you were nothing, because something in the way you took it made me feel large. I understand now what I was actually looking at. You let me stand at that bed last night and be a doctor when you had every right to put me through that wall, and I do not understand why, and I suspect the answer would be the worst part of all this for me. Whatever this committee decides, my conduct toward you is going to the medical staff office today, in a report I will write myself." He gathered his coat. At the door he stopped and said, without turning around, "The potassium was 4 minutes late because pharmacy released it late. It was never anything. I always knew it was never anything." And he was gone. The vote, in the end, was not close, and the binder did not survive contact with the morning. Karen Whitmore did not resign, because people like Whitmore never resign. But by the end of the week, the board had quietly restructured Emergency Operations Authority out from under her office, and the red binder was replaced by a real mass casualty plan with a real author. And when the local paper ran its front page under the headline, "Hospital in the Storm," with a photograph of 2 Black Hawks parked in a flooded lot at sunrise, Whitmore gave the interview and used the word "we" 11 times, and Lauren, reading it in the break room, found that she minded not at all. Camouflage came in many patterns. Let the binder woman stand in front. The work lived elsewhere, and always had. The harder currency moved through the building in smaller denominations. The 2 young nurses who had studied their charting screens during 3 years of public humiliations came to her separately, on the same day, to say the same clumsy, brave thing, that they had watched and said nothing and were ashamed. And she told each of them the truth, which was that silence in the ranks flows downhill from the people in charge, and that the debt they thought they owed her should be paid forward to whoever got cornered next. And both of them walked away lighter. And both of them, in the years that followed, became the kind of nurse other nurses hide behind. Delgado, the security officer, took to nodding at her in the corridors, one sharp drop of the chin, and she returned it the same way, and no words were ever added, because none were required between people who had both worn the anchor. The team came to say goodbye at midday, cleaned up and unrecognizable. 6 large, polite men in civilian clothes moving through the emergency department, leaving handshakes and gift shop chocolate in their wake. Josefa, wheeled out of recovery, shook her hand with a grip that could have crushed a radio, and told her that in his family, when someone saves your life, you gain a relative, and that she should expect Christmas cards forever. And he was not joking, and the cards would come every year, with photographs of an enormous smiling family that grew by the season. Boone hugged her, which violated approximately every custom of the community, and nobody said a word about it. And Dutch pretended with great discipline to be studying a hallway evacuation map. Colt could not leave with them. His fight had weeks left in it, but he was sitting up when she came by on her last round, and taped to the rail of his bed, where his hand could find it, was a photograph, creased white at the folds from years inside a locker door, of a younger Colt and a grinning man with his jaw and a small, dirty blonde woman in dusty fatigues, all squinting into some hard, bright, faraway sun. "My mother is flying in Thursday," Colt said. "I called her this morning. I told her there was somebody with him." He had to stop and manage his breathing, and did, and finished. "She wants to meet you." I told her the truth. I said the woman who was with Danny at the end is the same one who would not let me follow him. She said, "Tell her she has 2 sons now, and my mother does not say things she does not mean, so I would just accept it if I were you. Resistance is not going to work." "Understood," Lauren said, and discovered her voice needed a moment, and let it have one. Thursday, then. They found her that evening, the people who went looking, not in the hospital but at the edge of the flooded shore park half a mile away, where the Gulf lay flat and gold and exhausted under the sunset, littered with roof shingles and torn palm fronds and the peaceful debris of spent violence. Lauren Hayes, lieutenant commander, restored and unannounced, stood at the waterline with her sleeves rolled up and her forearm bare to the last light, and read the 7 names aloud, slowly, one at a time, the way they were meant to be read, by someone still alive who had been there. And when she finished, she stood a while longer, and the water came in and went out. and something 4 years old finally went out with it. Dutch and Boone and the walking members of the team found her there, as she had known they would, and stood with her in a loose line facing the water, and nobody performed anything, and it was exactly enough. Colt was awake upstairs and asking for 2 things, his brother's photograph, and 5 minutes with the nurse. Flint was out of surgery, and mean enough to argue with his own ventilator, which Okafor said was the best clinical sign she had seen all year. The Navy had offered Lauren everything: reinstatement, a training command, a consulting billet with her old community, a public decoration, and she had asked instead for the one thing on no list: to stay, to go back on shift at a small, flooded coastal hospital that now knew exactly what walked its halls at night, and to teach it, one nurse and one doctor and one storm season at a time, to be worthy of the worst night it might ever have. Brooks had approved the trauma readiness program before the conference room emptied. Priya had already started a list of names. "You know what the kid asked me this morning?" Dutch said, watching the water. "Boone, he asked what your call sign meant. Why echo?" Lauren smiled at the gulf. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That an echo is the voice that comes back after everyone swears the sound is gone." He turned to look at her. This small woman, the ocean and the Navy, and a hospital full of small, cruel mornings had all failed to erase and gave the last word to the water and the light. They asked for a call sign. They found the woman who earned it. The tide turned. The 7 names stayed with her, where they had always been, ink and memory in equal parts. The sleeves from that night forward stayed wherever she happened to leave them, which was its own quiet kind of victory. And on Monday night, when the schedule came out at Iron Harbor Medical Center, the night shift of the emergency department had a new charge nurse, and every single person on the roster had asked to work it. The end. If Lauren Hayes and the call sign Echo stayed with you tonight, help this story reach the next listener who needs it. Tap the like button. Subscribe to Silent Badge's stories, so the next hidden hero finds you first, and leave a comment telling us the exact moment this story hit you the hardest. We read every single one.